so great to be here with you. Thank you, Gertrude, for welcoming me into your tribe. I am so grateful to be here. I'm Kimberly Godsey. I'm a cardiology nurse practitioner. I practice in Monterey, California. And I'd love to share you a little bit about my story, my experience, and really what drives my passion. Um, Little backstory though, first. I was at a dinner party the other day and I had a very interesting experience. If any of you ever been at a dinner party where you kind of felt alone or in a crowd and you still felt alone? I had that experience as I was over listening to a group of people talking about how their life just keeps getting better in middle age. And I thought, is my life getting better? I don't know that I could say that at that time. So I thought maybe I missed a memo. What did I miss? And then it dawned on me, they don't have kids. They were very, very free in their lives in a way that is very different for me and different for my life. Now, I love having my children. My children are the best things that ever happened to me. Three teenage daughters. However, my preteen, my youngest, now thinks that sarcasm is a love language. Um, so even though I love being a mom, parenting is messy, it's hard, it can be overwhelming. I had no idea the chaos and the skills I would have to have until I had to negotiate a peace treaty between my three daughters and who gets to sit in the front seat every day. So, but I know that my daughters are actually just paying me back for all the grief that I gave my mom, which I did give her challenges, as any good daughter should. However, as I grew older and grew into an adult, my mother and I developed a really close friendship, and I learned to really start respecting her in a different way and seeing her as a person as opposed to just my mother. And her life was full of strife that would make most people falter. But she navigates her life in a way of resilience and strength and love, and very much always lifting others up, despite their faults, maybe actually because of their faults. Um, and she's a very proud mother. I still remember the look on her face when I graduated and became a nurse practitioner, which was always my dream, which I get to live today. And when I was training to be a nurse practitioner, I had a one mentor in particular that really stands out that I would like to share with you today. It was Dr. Seibert. And one particular day, we were rounding on our patients, and this one woman, middle-aged, petite woman, went into her room and she's telling us her symptoms of, chest pain, abdominal pain, nausea. And at that point, Dr. Seibert was like, excuse us for a minute. We're going to go check on your test results and we'll be right back in. And we get out of the room and he grabbed me on my shoulders and looked me dead in the eye with an intensity that really surprised me. And he said, Kim, do you know what's going on here? What's your diagnosis? What's a differential diagnosis? And I don't know if you've seen those shows like Grey's Anatomy or ER or Scrubs, where you have the attending who's like drilling all of the residents and the trainees. It's pretty intense. That's exactly what it felt like. So naturally, with a deer and a headlights look in my eye, I was honest. I said, I have no idea. So Dr. Seibert pulls out a piece of paper. He does all these diagrams and he starts drawing the liver and the gallbladder and the pancreas. And then he stops and he said, Kim, we have to diagnose her with pancreatic cancer. Now, the pancreatic cancer carries a less than 5% survival rate. So that's a hard diagnosis to deliver. Dr. Seibert said, Kim, if you learn nothing from me, learn this. Our job is to be healers. We're here to save lives. But inevitably, there's going to come a time in your career where you can't save everyone. But what you can do is you can change how they experience it. So he went, before going back in, he did something I'd never seen a doctor do before. And I'd been in the healthcare field by about 7 years at that point in time. And he called her husband and said, hey, I'm a little worried about your wife. Do you mind coming up to the clinic real quick? And then he proceeded to schedule himself her next steps, her CAT scan at 1, her consult follow-up at 4. So by the time we went back into the room to give her a diagnosis of pancreatic cancer, her husband was holding her hand, sitting by her side. She received that diagnosis with her loving husband, as opposed to being alone in a cold doctor's office. And Dr. Seibert scheduled all those tests because he knows that when you get a terrible news, you can't think. It's hard to function, no less like figure out I need to do what next and where and who do I call, and wait, that means I have to wait for 2 weeks. It's a pretty hard thing to endure. So the other day, I had a patient that I was working up for heart failure, and I scheduled him for an ultrasound of his heart. It's called an echocardiogram. And naturally, as you can imagine, he was scared and overwhelmed during the test. And one doctor was there, in particular, Dr. Rock, who saw him and came out and sat with him and talked him through every step and what was going on next and what to expect. So by the time he returned to see me in the clinic, he was in tears. And what he said to me that day was, even if it was the worst news I could ever receive, her care and compassion was the best medicine I needed that day. So I hold on to those moments in my career. And I had heard from Dr. Seibert for a few years after I completed my training. And one day I got a call from him when I was working in the hospital. I was rounding on my last patient. And he said, hey, Kim, I just saw your mom. I'm worried about her. Are you coming to her appointment tomorrow? I had no plans on going to that appointment. I was supposed to take my kids to a festival called Mayfete that we did every year. But I sure as hell showed up at her appointment the next day. And he did, sure enough, diagnose my mom with pancreatic cancer. And he did so with all 3 of her children by her side. And he said, Pat, your CAT scan's at 1, your follow-up appointment's at 4 on a Friday. And I don't know if any of you guys have tried to navigate the healthcare system or get an appointment on a Friday or anything done. It's like an act of God moving mountains. 4 o'clock on a Friday. You know, I learned that day that sometimes bad news isn't the worst thing. Sometimes being in limbo and wondering, is this bad? Is it not? What do I do about it? It keeps you stuck on the fence and in a spiral you can't manage. But even if the news is the worst news, once you have it, it gives you something to do with it. It gives you a place to put it. It gives you actions to move forward. So, although these are pretty extreme examples, all of us, any of us, have an ability to affect the way other people experience a situation, right? It just takes a few minutes to think not what's going on in your world, but what might be going on in their world. And we know very little about what else is going on in other people's lives. Sometimes even the people that are closest to us, we don't know. The other day I was driving and I was sitting behind a car that was trying to turn left, and the car was taking forever, and I was getting impatient, and I kept thinking maybe a little toot of the horn, because it seemed like she had ample opportunity. But I had my daughter in the car. I was trying to be a good example, and when I saw her turn left, I realized it was a brand new teenage driver. So if I would have reacted based off of my own frustration and my own experience in the situation, I could have potentially startled her and caused her to turn left before she was ready, and maybe even cause an accident. So I was very grateful for my daughter being in the car with me that day. It taught me a lesson. The thing is about all of the importance of these connections that we make with other people and the time that we spend with people is that in choosing to be kind to others isn't just about feeling good. There's a lot of research out there that shows people who have strong, authentic connections with others, whether it's family, friends, even the strangers on the street count, that it actually increases your survival by 50%. 50%. That's huge. Conversely, if you don't have close ties with other people, someone that you can call and depend on, if you spend your life in social isolation, which our culture is increasingly doing, here in the United States, where people are living in silos and their families are alone, as opposed to in a tribe together or in a community where you have other people that you can reach out to who will be there for you. When you don't have those connections, your risk of a heart attack goes up by 30%. 30%. That's huge. That's the same risk that your risk of a heart attack goes up if you smoke cigarettes. So in healthcare, social isolation is the new smoking. And what I want to encourage all of us here in our world, in our tribe of women, I want to build each other up, to lift each other up, and not just to feel good. It's actually good for your health. So the next time you're choosing between honking, road rage, getting frustrated for whatever reason, and being patient and kind, don't just do it for the other person. Do it for yourself, because it makes you healthier, happier, more whole, stronger. And we as women, as we're climbing up, not just looking at that next step, but we're also leaning down and reaching down to lift up another woman with us. Because all of this, we don't want just extra years in our lives. We want extra quality life in our years. Thank you so much.
Wow. Kimberly, I've heard you speak before, but every single time I have contact with you, You have so many layers to your life, to your work, to your understanding of who we are as human beings. I feel really proud to have you on our summit today. Now, let's delve a little bit into you, your personal and professional journey. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey to becoming a cardiology nurse practitioner and what initially drew you to the field?
Ah, yes. Um, my original major in college was actually psychology, and I thought I would go into be a therapist. Went to school, and there's something missing in it for me. I come from a long line of advanced practice nurses. I have aunts who are nurses, and but I think really what really inspired me was I watched my older sister become a nurse, and I saw the difference that it made in her life when she could affect other people's lives positively and be there for them in a way that no one else could. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll dip my toe into nursing a little bit. And I got a job as a nurse's aide in a late stage Alzheimer's nursing home, which is challenging. But I fell in love with helping others. I fell in love with being there. I fell in love with being able to help be there for someone when they're in their most vulnerable state.
Mhm.
And I fell in love with medicine, and I just can't get enough. And so I became a registered nurse and then a nurse practitioner. And the heart makes so much sense for me. But in my work every day, I find myself not just doing cardiology, but also incorporating the psychology that I learned in school. And there's an emerging field called cardiac psychology that is significantly growing. So I'm just passionate about the work and the people that it helps.
So, how do your experiences in healthcare shape your understanding of life's challenges and resilience, especially when it comes to dealing with, emergency or health crisis within your family? I know you went through a lot when your
Mhm.
your mom was diagnosed with cancer.
Yeah, I think it's very helpful, although I would have liked to have not, but it's very helpful to have had personal experiences and to have to um, understand what it means and how scary and how overwhelming it is for people when they receive a diagnosis. And it could
Yeah.
be anything, it doesn't have to be pancreatic cancer. Heart failure, I specialize in heart failure, is a very scary diagnosis. And it's so important to understand how the other person might be experiencing that diagnosis and how they're overwhelmed. I
Mm,
remember sitting there when my mom was diagnosed, asking questions and just hanging on every word the doctor said,
yeah.
searching for hope and understanding. And so I try to remember that my experience every day with my patients when I deliver a diagnosis or I'm helping them with their care plan to make it sure it's personalized, and not am I just giving them the medicine they need, but I'm giving them the compassion and care and understanding that they need.
Wow. Now, you've had mentors who've played pivotal roles in your career.
Mhm.
You've shared about one of them. Can you share more about how mentorship has influenced you?
Oh, mentorship is huge, huge. I mean, I've had so many mentors. Um, it really makes a difference. I think having a good mentor, someone who believes in you, can
Yeah.
make or break you. Honestly, if you have a really not so great mentor, they can break you down. But building you up, pushing harder is very, very important. There was a one mentor back where I trained. His name is Dr. Wojciech, in Missouri, and he wouldn't stop. He wouldn't stop. He'd ask me questions over and over and over and over again. And he was funny because he said he brought a lot of compassion and mindfulness into his work with his patients, and he did so for his work because he was a I'm going to be polite with my words, a recovering jerk. He used a different word for it. Um, and he realized that he's where I really started seeing the research and learning about the research about how our emotions actually and our mental health truly affect our physical health. And really
Yes.
seeing those ties that if we don't heal our mental health, we're not going to heal our physical health either. They're so
That's
deeply connected.
wow. Now, with regards to on-patient care and compassion, healthcare can be emotionally demanding. How do you balance professional detachment with compassionate care for your patients?
Mm, very important question. There is a certain amount of distance that you have to have when you're treating people, and I treat people in critical care, in the ICU, when people have go into cardiac arrest, doing running the CPR, bringing them back. Um, I get to know my patients and their families very, very well. And so there is a space that I need to carry in between it. And sometimes it's even walking out of the hospital, reminding myself that it's their drama, not my drama. I'm just here
Mm,
to hold space. But I also take time to feel it. I have to sit in healthcare. My experience is a lot of times like if you have in the hospital, especially if one patient unfortunately doesn't make it or dies, then you just got to keep going. You got to keep going on to the next. But I do take time to feel it. I've learned that I have to, when I'm done and I can let my guard down, I have to feel those emotions and
yeah.
process them and take time to take care of me so that
Mm,
and fill my cup so that I can come back fully to work and be there for them. And it's the same thing with my children and my
yeah.
loved ones. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember reading a book once that said your feelings are like your children.
Mm.
When they come and they want your attention, you have to just sit with them for a while. You shouldn't, push them away because the more
Yes.
you resist the feelings, the more they want your attention.
That's beautiful. I have not heard it said that way, but that is absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, yeah. Now, what do you believe is the most important quality a healthcare provider should have when it comes to patient interactions?
Obviously, clinical expertise, but in the interaction, I think they need to have compassion. I talk to my colleagues all the time about, a lot of times patients look very put together and as if they don't have any anxiety underneath, but the reality is it's bubbling underneath. And so remembering that helps us put a different spin on how we respond because
Yes.
we're meeting people on their worst days, not their
Mm.
best days. Yeah.
Hmm. Yes, it's interesting when you put it that way. Now, what role has your mother played in shaping your values and career path?
My mother, an amazing woman, she she was a single mother of four. And when my father divorced, she only had a high school diploma. She went back to school and got her bachelor's and master's in healthcare administration, I think, uh, in 3 or 4 years, both of them together combined. So her determination and her grit and her resilience and her commitment to education and her children still drives me to this day. I think about
Mhm.
her, but I'll share with you one other piece. So my mother, um, she never judged people. And she
Yeah.
understood that when people make poor decisions, it's not because they're bad people. It's because something bad happened to them. And they
Yes.
yeah, and they just need healing.
Mm.
And she lived her life with forgiveness and grace for others. And she died the same way. She was sick for a year before she died. And she met everyone and called everyone to make sure that all of her relationships were good and
Mhm.
secure and that any wrongdoings were forgiven. And
Oh,
so she drives my work every day.
it's amazing to have had such a role model as a young woman and to have been able to care for her when she needed you the most.
Yeah.
I think that's quite an honor.
Yeah.
Now, parenting can be chaotic, as you shared in your story. What lessons from parenthood do you carry into your professional life?
Mm. I firmly believe that my role as a parent is to help create an environment for my children to grow into whoever they are meant to be.
Mm,
And that who they're meant to be is something they decide, not me. I'm just
uh,
here to be the buffer, and to help with opportunities and growth. I think that's true in my work. I do a lot of mentorship. I take on a lot of students. And I think it's important to pay it forward, just like others did for me.
I love it. Now, you've had an opportunity to speak on the TEDx stage.
Mhm.
What message did you want to convey most strongly to your audience?
Most strongly, I really want people, I want to help people understand that deep connection from our mental health to our physical health. In the medical field, when I started out training, it's kept very, very separate. But
Yeah.
it's not like you can like take someone's head off and their brain off and their body still functions. Like it's ridiculous to think that, right? Like, I mean, we can't. It's so connected. It's so important, and what we and so treating our and I don't like the word mental health. I like to say mental fitness and mental wellness because
Okay.
everybody has a brain. So everybody's
Yes.
brain and mind and soul needs to be taken care of. And so
Wow.
learning how to be mentally fit actually can prevent cardiovascular disease. And in some cases, even if you have high blood pressure or obesity or diabetes, there's a lot that we can do to reverse it. But naturally, holistically, I mean, there are things that absolutely need medications, absolutely. So,
Yeah.
but we can do. But if we work on our inner soul, and calm ourselves. So I really talk a lot about breathing techniques and triggering the vagus nerve, which is a deep nerve inside our chest that goes from our brain to our heart to our lungs. And when we trigger it, meaning taking a deep breath, holding it for at least 5 seconds, and then blowing it out slow and controlled,
Mm,
that's a way to calm our nervous system. Most people are living in fight or flight these days, but we're not meant to. We're meant to live
mm.
in a much more calm nervous system. And so I also talk to people a lot about mindfulness, just really kind of trying to not get caught up in negative thoughts and fears and emotions, and just be really present with the moment. And the other important things, connections, like I talked about today, connections with others, authentic connections is so important. There's a lot of research out there, and I'm talking about scientific, evidence based, research driven, peer reviewed research that shows even positive interactions with strangers actually improves your health. No, makes a big
Yeah.
difference. Everyone knows about exercise and diet, um,
Yes.
but there's all these other components that are so important.
Mm, mm.
And I'm writing a book about all those to create, hopefully, a framework, or a guidepost to help people through those.
That is awesome. Now, you mentioned that social isolation is as damaging as smoking.
Mhm.
How do you encourage people to build those meaningful connections in today's world?
Oh my, okay. So I'll tell you a story. I had a patient who I've been working with to get his blood pressure controlled for over a year. And he lives alone, and he had some other vascular stuff that was going on, and I had referred him over and to a vascular specialist, and he just didn't want to go. He would come in and he's like, I just have a half a mind to tell you to shove it. I don't want to do it. And so I'm like, oh, I'm trying to adjust these medications, and he'd been talking about wanting a dog or something, or maybe going to see a sister, and wouldn't do it, wouldn't do it, wouldn't do it. For whatever reason, I'm sure mental health was holding him back, depression, anxiety. And
Yes.
he came in the last time I saw him, he came in and his blood pressure was completely normal. I mean, it was beautiful. And I was like, oh my gosh, you followed up with the vascular specialist. Like, oh my gosh, that's great. You're doing it. And he goes, no, I got a kitty. He went out and
Oh,
got a kitten. And so
mm,
he sits with the cat and pets the cat, and it fills his soul. And these interactions are so important. And so I
yeah.
always ask people, like, Who do you live with? What do you do for fun? Who are your connections? Who do you call when things are hard? Do you
Yeah.
have someone? Yeah, and if not, reach out and get a kitty. It helps. It really makes a difference.
Oh, I love it. That's just a beautiful story. Again, connection doesn't necessarily have to be with other human beings.
Mm-mm,
This is why
mm-mm,
pets are so powerful.
mm-hmm.
Now,
They're
what
very.
advice? Mhm.
I was just saying, yeah, animals actually calm our nervous system. They help
Yes.
regulate us. Yeah.
So, what advice would you give to healthcare professionals facing burnout or
Mm.
compassion fatigue?
It's time to take care of yourself
Yeah.
and ask for help. A few years ago, while in the pandemic, early stages pandemic, spent started spending a lot more time being honest about my own mental health, which I
Mhm.
hadn't. I went through a phase of depression with potential suicide ideation that I share in my TEDx talk.
Mhm.
Even despite looking like I had everything I always wanted, right? Three
Yes.
amazing daughters, a loving husband, a great career, living in beautiful Monterey, California. And if you've never been here, I strongly recommend visiting. But I struggled, and so I started talking with my colleagues, and I'm like, we're talking about it behind closed doors,
Yes.
but not. It's we still don't feel comfortable talking about it in the open, and I just want to break it open. I just want to break it open. I want to be open and honest and talk about mine so that other people can talk about theirs and get the help that they need. What and we all are going to need help at some point, right? Eventually we're all going to have a cold. Eventually
Yeah.
we're all going to need to build our own mental wellness and mental stillness.
Yes.
So taking a step back, self-care, getting a massage, doing working on a hobby, it's all so important. There's adults, we stop playing, but reason part of the reason why kids play is because it actually regulates their nervous system. And so we as adults, there's research that show that we really should, in whatever it is, play, whether it's playing tennis, whether it's doing artwork, whether it's putting together a model car. It's
Yes.
so important for us to do all of that.
I love it. Now, my last question for you is this. If there's one thing you hope people take away from your story and experience, what would that be?
It would be that if you are struggling and not feeling well, that it's okay to hurt, and everyone does, and it's okay to ask for help, and it's okay to take care of yourself and to do self-care. Self-care isn't selfish, it's necessary, and it should be a priority in your life, because if self-care is not a priority now, your sickness and illness will become a priority later. So it's time for us to take care of ourselves and each other.
Absolutely wonderful. Kimberly, thank you so much for coming online and gracing us with your presence during this online summit. It's always inspiring when I find a woman who is using her life experiences and fusing it into her work, supporting her community. These are the kind of stories that we want to broadcast. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me and welcoming me into your tribe. I feel beyond honored. Thank you.
Fantastic. And thank you to everybody who's tuned in. We've been going for a month with the Her Story Summit. We're almost coming to an end. And I really have to thank all of the amazing women, the speakers who have stepped up to share their stories, to share their knowledge and their skills. The Her Story Circle is a social impact movement. We bring you the stories and voices of women from all over the world to uplift you, to inspire you, to energize you, to empower you, but most importantly, to take you from where you are now to where you want to go. So tune in again tomorrow when I interview yet another amazing guest. Have a fantastic day, morning, or evening, wherever you are in the world, and bye for now. Thanks again, Kimberly.
Thank you.